All right, let's move on. Land Development Code. Rodney.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Rodney Gonzalez, Assistant City Manager. For the public that is watching, the other two items that we're going to cover today are the base motion options for the Land Development Code and the supplemental staff report number 2. And with that, I will hand it over to Brent Lloyd, who is co-lead for the Land Development Code revision.
In case anybody's watching, that's because property taxes and housing capacity were addressed earlier in our meeting. So if you're tuning in now to learn that, you have to go back earlier in the day to get it. Go ahead.
Thank you, Rodney. Thanks, Mayor and Council. We're going to shift gears from the other topics that we've covered related to the Land Development Code, and we're going to start talking for a few minutes about the process for acting on first reading. I think that we're getting close enough with the public hearing coming up on Saturday and action scheduled for next week to start talking about some of the procedural issues and making sure that all of you know kind of what will be before you at first reading, aside from council-initiated items that you all may be considering. So at first reading, the base document that will be before council is the Land Development Code draft and zoning map that was published on October 4th and presented at Planning Commission's October 26th public hearing. Following are recommendations that could be incorporated as first reading amendments, and we're going to talk about the first two of them in more detail. We have the Planning Commission report that was issued on November 22nd. And we have the supplemental staff report, the second one. And then we also have, that should be indented over further to the left and not grouped with the others. But then we also, of course, have any amendments that the council itself wants to initiate. So that is sort of the working universe of options that will be before you at first reading. So the ones that are already existing, we want to talk about those a little bit. The Planning Commission recommendation includes these items. It includes the changes that are described in the Planning Commission report that was issued on November 22nd and was provided to you all. And we've provided a enumerated list of all the different actions and amendments that the Planning Commission has recommended. We also noted for your reference the staff's positions with respect to each of the Planning Commission recommendations. We've indicated whether staff agrees, partially agrees, is neutral, or opposes the recommendations. Additionally, the Planning Commission voted to include in its recommendation the changes that are described in the first supplemental staff report. So it's important to understand that if you all were to concur in the Planning Commission's recommendation, that you would be concurring in those changes as well. So just to go through those, that is the text revisions that are at page 3 to 8 of the first report. They're numbered and organized by topic for easy reference. And additionally, we have provided a document that has typos and very minor non-substantive wording changes, as well as map corrections. And those are in hyperlinked spreadsheets that are linked to the supplement to the staff reports. And those continue, as we've indicated, to be updated on an ongoing basis as we identify non-substantive errors, typographical changes, mistakes in cross-referencing, things of that nature. Additionally, the first supplemental included appendices A and A1, which are amendments to the growth concept map and corresponding text of Imagine Austin. And then finally, Appendix B to the first supplemental is recommended changes to the off-premise sign regulations that would allow limited opportunities for additional off-premise advertising. So that is the universe of things that are included in the Planning Commission recommendation. So a motion to approve the draft, which obviously it goes without saying is not council's only option. We know that there are members who may have other motions to make, but a motion to approve with Planning Commission recommendations would include all of the items that I just mentioned unless specifically excluded. So if a council member wishes to move subject to approval of some of the Planning Commission recommendations, you could do so by simply listing the items that you're excluding. A Planning Commission recommendation except for, and then list the numbered items that are excluded. Separately, a motion could include some or all of the new recommendations that are described in the second supplemental report that we issued right before Thanksgiving. And for ease of reference, the second supplemental report lists all the revisions that are in the first supplemental report, and it indicates that those are from the first supplemental, and then it says new recommendations and lists the new recommendations. We did that because we wanted council to be able to see the universe of staff recommended changes all together, sequentially numbered and organized for ease of reference. So before we go further into the meat of the second supplemental, which we'll be talking about tomorrow as well as this afternoon, that is essentially sort of the procedural options that are before you. We're hoping that by making it easy to dispose of the commission recommendations and the staff recommendations in an orderly manner, that you all will have time to make your own motions and to consider council-initiated amendments. So with that, we'll dive into the meat of the second supplemental report.
And then just to that end, just to comment real quickly, what I put in the board yesterday is that I would recognize someone to make a motion to basically bring forward the recommendations that came from staff. And that would be embodied in the staff recommendation. It would include the PC recommended items that were agreed to by staff. So the things that were not agreed to by staff, or ones that staff said it didn't have an opinion on, or the ones that staff said we agree in part and don't agree in other parts, wouldn't include any of those. It would just be the staff recommendations that were in the original proposition, the supplement number 1, the supplement number 2, and the PC recommendations that were agreed to by staff. That's my current intent in terms of the opening motion. That would then be that base document. And then we could amend from that. Kathy, do you have a question about that?
Just very quickly about something you referenced. The staff recommendations to the Planning Commission's recommendations, where is that? Where do I find that?
I can resend it to your office, but the November 22nd report that we provided to council that lists all the PC recommendations, that spreadsheet includes a column for staff response, and that will indicate what staff's position was with respect to all of those items.
Okay, I think we must have cut it short.
Okay.
So I have the spreadsheet, but not that column, so I just need to reprint.
Okay.
Thank you.
If you need us to resend it, we can do that.
No worries. I'll find it. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, yes.
Real quick on the same topic, is there a way, I've got the PDF, but I was wondering if there's an Excel version so we can sort by the things that you agreed with, partially agreed with, or opposed. Is that something that's available?
We can provide that to you.
Okay, that'd be cool. Thank you.
Provide that to all the offices. Okay, continue on.
And Mayor, just a quick response to a comment you made. When we have indicated in the Planning Commission report that we partially agree with a recommendation, it means that we agree with the concept. We have different ideas about how to best execute it. So if council wants to include the ones for which staff partially agrees, we feel there's a path forward to implement those. It's just going to differ in the particulars somewhat from what the commission suggested.
Sounds good. We're not going to make that part of the base motion. Someone wants to bring those forward, we'll have the discussion about that. Okay.
So turning to the second supplemental, the report includes basically 3 parts. It includes, as I mentioned, some new text and map revisions that are based on changes that we sort of previewed in the first supplemental, but we fleshed them out more in this report, as well as additional feedback. As we've tried to mention when we talk to you at these work sessions, we have continued to meet with stakeholder groups, to attend community meetings, and to receive feedback on the code. And on an ongoing and iterative basis, we have made course corrections and continue to address nuances in how the code is drafted, and that informs the text revisions that are in the second supplemental report as well. We've also provided a section that outlines programmatic measures that we believe are necessary for successful implementation. As the manager indicated in the March 15th memo that sort of started this process, the code is about a lot more than just the code and the map. It's about the culture. It's about the resources that are available. It's about all the steps that go into implementation. And as this process moves forward, we think it's important that we start to hone in with greater specificity on the steps required for implementation. In the third and final section of the report is background information on the former Title 25 zone. So with that, tomorrow we will be discussing revised mapping criteria for transition areas and high opportunity areas, proposed reductions in maximum floor to area ratio based on ongoing staff analysis, and also changes to better account for usable space and how FAR is calculated. We're not going to talk about those items today, but I know those are of interest to council members, and I want you to know that there will be a space to go into those issues. What we do want to talk about is another item that we know is of importance to council, and that is the preservation incentive. In the October 25th staff report, we indicated to council that we felt, based on our own analysis as well as feedback from the community, that the preservation incentive as originally proposed needs changing. It needs to be recalibrated and revised. And the reason we believe that is that it needs to be essentially better calibrated to ensure that the enhanced development potential that flows from preserving an older unit is really going to further the city's housing capacity goals, that it's really going to benefit projects that are meaningfully providing additional units and not just be a tool to provide bigger single-family or two-family residential units. Additionally, we also recognize that improvements are needed with respect to better defining how the preserved unit can be modified. So we think across the board changes are necessary to help the preservation incentive better further council's goals. So the changes that we proposed in the second supplemental, and we'll just go through them, I believe they're listed at page 13 of the supplemental, are to require that a portion of the front facade of the preserved unit be retained and that any modifications include the addition of a private frontage if one does not exist, and that essentially means a porch. Limit the floor area that can be added when utilizing the preservation incentive, potentially by requiring the bonus unit to count towards the maximum floor to area ratio and exempting or partially exempting the preserved unit. And that's a change from how the code is currently drafted, in which the additional unit is exempted from FAR. Additionally, some other changes that we feel would really help to improve this tool are to clarify the extent to which a preserved structure may be modified using the requirements applicable to non-conforming structures as a baseline, and include appropriate administrative and enforcement provisions. If council approves these set of changes, we would work with the law department on developing appropriate administration and enforcement provisions, which we recognize are necessary. Clarify that a bonus unit added through the preservation incentive may be used for any residential use allowed in the base zone, and that may result in more than one ADU. Clarify that for multifamily uses that utilize the preservation incentive, the number of new units that can be added is equal to the number of preserved units plus one additional unit. And we think there are some ways in which the current code is not written as precisely as it could be on each of these issues. So that is, those are the set of changes that we're proposing with respect to the preservation incentive. And we believe that if council approves those will give staff clear and firm direction as to the kind of changes that you would want to see on second reading. And we have staff present as well to address any further questions.
Okay. We have 15 minutes left, roughly, so everybody that wants to speak probably gets 2 minutes, and I'm going to let you speak either to questions on this or anything that you want to speak to. Kathy.
Okay, I have like 4 hours of questions, but I'll let me just start with bullet one. I think I need to better understand all of these bullets. Let me just say, though, that I appreciate you taking a look at the preservation incentive and really working on it. Did I understand you correctly that first bullet means that you must add a porch?
Basically, if with a preserved unit, if you're gonna modify the front facade and it doesn't have a private frontage, a porch, then one needs to be added. And we've recommended before that with multi, and I think staff can help elucidate kind of the reasoning behind this, but with sort of the house scale multi-unit residential, that having porches really helps to relate the structures to the street. And so if you're going to be modifying a preserved structure, I think the idea would be that if you're making modifications to the facade and there's not a private frontage provided, that one should be provided.
going to have to really think that through and talk with some of those in our historic preservation community, because some of these structures that I hope we're going to retain through a preservation incentive are going to be historic structures that may have architectural styles that are not compatible with porch. I mean, I think it's great to have a porch. Wish I had one, but it's not necessarily something that is compatible with every architectural style we might want to support being preserved.
And so actually, just to clarify, that Greg Dutton, Planning and Zoning, the provision for a porch is really, it allows you to add a porch if you want to. It's not a requirement.
Oh, okay.
We're envisioning
Okay.
it as something that would be optional.
All right, that makes sense. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Councilmember Harper Madison.
Yes.
Councilmember Harper Madison.
Well, and we're talking specifically just about the preservation incentive, correct?
Anything you want to talk about?
Oh, well, in that case, there was something that came up during the course of the conversation around capacity earlier that piqued my interest. He said something about feasibility as it pertained to challenges. And here, it's on page 17. Site-specific attributes that impact feasibility. The presence of heritage trees was one that piqued my interest there. And it got me thinking about what our options are here. And so I have some general questions about that. And they don't have to be answered today. It was just something that came up for me during the course of that conversation. And then as it pertains to the preservation bonus, I guess I'm curious. It seems like this is a substantially different version of the preservation bonus, and I'm curious how that evolution transpired.
I think that we received feedback, and council did as well, that the preservation incentive might have the effect of essentially allowing simply bigger units, bigger single units or 2-unit structures, and really not furthering the council's housing capacity goals, which is one of the core components and reasons behind the preservation incentive. So I think that the community feedback questioned whether the additional entitlements were really serving the value that the incentive was meant to serve. And I think there are also concerns about the scale of floor to area ratio within these zones. And we're going to talk more broadly about that in other contexts as well tomorrow. But I think all those concerns, as well as staff's ongoing review of this new tool, led us to conclude that really some changes would really be beneficial. And so what we provided in the second supplemental is a list of what we think would really help to improve the preservation incentive.
And back to the heritage tree question, is there a such thing as a heritage tree preservation bonus that would that could give builders and homeowners more flexibility that they need?
We there is not. There's not sort of any sort of a blanket development incentive that is provided for preserving heritage trees, which is a code requirement. There's not. Preserving heritage trees absent a variance is a code requirement, and there's not a development bonus provided for that.
So my thought around that was, it could offer people the opportunity to come up with creative ways to design around them and simultaneously protect the heritage tree canopy. I just wonder if that's something we could take into consideration.
Councilmember Harper Madison, one change that I think I wouldn't quite characterize it as a development bonus, but it's, I think, a meaningful addition to the code is the Board of Adjustments criteria for considering variances have been clarified to really make it plain that they have the ability to consider tree preservation and looking at whether to allow a variance. And, the board, they're a sovereign board, and they'll have to weigh that appropriately. But that is something that's built into their variance criteria. But there's not there's not any kind of an automatic entitlement for preserving heritage trees.
Which is not to say that if you wanted to bring one up as an amendment, you could certainly do that kind of thing.
That's my thought.
Okay,
Thank you.
let's move on. Paige.
On that same subject, I've been working with some language about heritage tree preservation in the centers and corridors and transit priority network. So I think we're kind of thinking in the same line, but I think that's a really cool idea to allow if someone is trying to build something to maybe build it a little bit differently to protect trees. So I'd be happy to help in any way I can, or maybe staff wants to talk about it, but I think that's a really cool idea.
Okay. Jimmy?
I would concur, and the thought that I had on that was mostly some form of administrative variance on setbacks within a certain variance. So you could maybe have staff give a 5% variance on a setback, and if you wanted more than 5, then you got to go to BOA. But something that can work faster than going to Board of Adjustment at a small, maybe de minimis thing, but can help shift a building just to the left, and that kind of thing was what I had in mind. But yeah, I think it'd be a good idea.
Okay. Greg?
Mayor, yeah, I plan on supporting starting at a place with a base motion as you described on the message board. I think that's a good starting place, and then we could still go back and amend portions of any of those recommendations that we want to change, or we could bring in Planning Commission recommendations that weren't agreed to. But I think knowing that that's the starting place will help us in drafting amendments, and we're drafting ours now. I hope tomorrow to be able to hand out as much of those amendments that I plan on bringing on first reading as possible, and of course posting anything else by Friday, but hopefully tomorrow. I already have some drafts going and trying to make those relative to the base motion as you've described. A lot of them I've already posted and talked about on the message board, things like graduating FAR as you do more units so that you encourage smaller units, really trying to make the preservation bonus accessible to as many people as possible, and to make it, really work. And I think some of the work the staff has done takes us in that direction. Making sure that VMU sites generally stay the way they are as we expand the density bonus program. Working on some issues on drainage we've been hearing about, just trying to really make sure that this code is addressing drainage while we're addressing housing. And then some of the process stuff that has been brought up around. I think people should be able to use the preservation bonus without having to go through a long site plan process. And I think some of that stuff is in Planning Commission recommendations that may not be in the base motion. And so some of those things, I'll hopefully have them written up and done in time for tomorrow to be able to hand them out as we go through the sections of amendments, and can try to use our time tomorrow to talk about each other's really specific amendments. And we'll post everything that I can, if not tomorrow, by Friday.
Okay. Tomorrow's session is going to start at noon. As soon as we have a quorum present, we'll go. Staff's going to make a presentation tomorrow on the issues that were identified. We've allotted an hour for that. We've allotted up to an hour for us to ask questions, time evenly divided. And then the balance of the time, we thought we'd run through the 6 areas that the Planning Commission used, the same 6 areas we used before, interpreting the headings broadly to ensure that everyone can bring up any topic they want to, running for 4 hours tomorrow. And then we had talked about the public hearing is on Saturday. That will be, by the way, I think the 67th public hearing that we've had since 2017. The hearing we have on Monday will be the 68th public hearing. Huh? Public hearing. So not work sessions, not anything that we were just talking ourselves. This is where the public was invited to speak. Does not include neighborhood association meetings or those kinds of things. These are structured public meetings for the public to be able to talk about the Land Development Code. On Monday, when we start the first reading, I'm going to entertain that first motion we talked about, and then we'll go around and give everybody an opportunity in rotating order to be able to bring suggestions up. We'll give priority to those amendments that were posted by Friday noon, and then if we've been through those, then we'll consider other amendments. Councilmember Poole.
So I have how long? 2 minutes?
Couple minutes, yeah.
I will be bringing some issues forward as amendments on Monday, and I'll post up on the message board. So just to give everybody kind of a heads up, and I'll have more explanation on the message board. Environmental issues, including trees. A couple folks have already spoken about trees. I want to strengthen the proposed code language and push forward on climate resiliency. And that's something that the Planning Commission, they've got a recommendation on increasing the tree canopy from 35 to 40%, and then to be spread equitably around the city. But in areas like District 1, it's been a longstanding issue to get enough trees not just planted but cared for to ensure shade and relief from our heat index long into the future. So we really need to be paying some specific attention to the tree canopy. We could even be ambitious and have a no net loss and 50 by 50 tree canopy policy, as in a 50% canopy, a long-term goal of 50% canopy by 2050. This would align with our climate plan and our resiliency goals, and it would help those parts of our city that are really suffering from heat and that are missing the community benefit of having healthy trees. So I'll lay that out a little bit more on the message board. Of course, local area flooding, which is protection of the health and safety in our neighborhoods. We need to make sure that we have no impervious cover increases in areas with local area flooding. I know staff is researching this, but I really want to see the results of that research before we get to final readings. We really need the benefit of that data. And then reserve impervious cover increases in R4 and RM1 for on-site affordable housing rather than a fee in lieu. If we are really chasing affordable housing, we must insist that it be built on the site of the development, mostly because our fee in lieu programs tend to undervalue the cost, and then we end up without actually the benefit of what the fee in lieu is proposed for. Helping our families and seniors, I've got 3 items here. Increase multi-bedroom units so that our families are served, and also that recognizes our urban public schools. This is something that Kathy has spoken to many, many times in the years that we've shared the dais. So we should be focusing on increasing multi-bedroom units, particularly in the urban core of our city, so that we can make sure that our great school districts, our public schools, have enough children to populate the schools so we don't have another round of really painful school closures. And we know that more are coming with the Austin Independent School District. Helping our homeowners and struggling families through programs to build on their properties and stay in place. Kathy touched on this earlier today when she was pulling back an item, I think it was item number 2 on our agenda for Thursday. It would be great if we could build on the already have in place to help homeowners and lower income families so that they can build on their property like an ADU and be able to stay in place. It's really expensive to build an ADU. I did a little bit of research a couple of years ago to put one in my backyard, and I would have had to take out a second mortgage for over $200,000 in order to build the ADU, and that wasn't a fine. And then the amortization on that unit would have been so many years into the future. At my age, it didn't seem like a really good move, and I'm sure I'm not alone on that. So we need to be looking at ways to incentivize and support and, frankly, subsidize the building of the ADU units for those homeowners and lower-income families who want them, but who, like me, either couldn't afford it because I couldn't have afforded it. But if I'd had a program, kind of like what we did with installation of solar on roofs, there were rebates for solar on roofs, we could do something along those lines to really promote the building of these accessory dwelling units. And then my all-time favorite that I know everybody is just really excited to talk about, protest rights. I promise to keep pushing on this until we actually have a conversation about it. I know that Brent sent us a memo a couple of years ago where he laid out his opinion, his legal opinion, back when he was in the law department, that he did not believe that in a comprehensive rewrite that residents had property rights to the extent of protest rights. But while I appreciate that his particular approach and his particular legal opinion on that, that is not the opinion of the city. We have not debated that issue. As I said earlier today, we have not debated that issue formally and officially. Our residents, in a formal debate on that, our residents would have the ability to come in and talk to us about it and tell us what they would like. It is my opinion that people who own property have a right to influence what happens on that property. And that is the firm foundation for my drive to get us to discuss and have a conversation publicly about protest rights. I believe that owners of property in our city have protest rights under this comprehensive rewrite plan. I do not believe that we can simply write ourselves out of it with some fine legal language to say that by fiat it is no longer the case. So, protest rights.
Thank you. The numbers I gave about the 66 public meetings so far, I want to thank Ed Espinoza for actually counting all of them. And I think what he was referring to were public hearings, public meetings where the public has an opportunity to be able to speak and to engage.
And I would add, when I looked at Ed's numbers, he didn't include the almost 20 meetings I held in my district in 2017 and 18.
Right.
It was even a lot more than that.
Did not include any neighborhood association meetings or other similar kinds of stuff. Allison.
In the interest of time, I'm just wondering, I have questions about the supplemental, and given that we've all been at this since 9 a.m., I would prefer to ask them tomorrow.
You can?
If that's okay.
There's going to be
with
further
that.
conversation, even from staff on the second supplemental.
Okay.
Everything will be open for discussing on that.
Okay. I just wasn't sure with that because I have one of what I'm trying to understand is kind of the specificity that we're going to get, and that's really going to affect what amendments I make and other things, and so I hope we can have that discussion.
Do you want to daylight the area of the question so the staff has?
No, because
thinks
we're
about it so much?
losing people, and that kind of defeats the purpose of daylighting.
Well, you could daylight so that staff was more prepared to speak to us more. No,
I
that's
think
fine.
they're all on things that we've talked about before, so nothing is going to
Okay.
particularly surprise them that I want more clarity.
Sounds good. Does anybody want to say anything else? No, it is 5:03 and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
I came of age in a small town in the mountains far away. There wasn't much that I didn't try, but I tried to make my way.